My friend Ben walked 500 miles to find clarity from God, and what he discovered might surprise you. He didn't go on a pilgrimage to escape the realities of his everyday life, but to step back long enough to ask deeper questions. Where's God leading me? What am I supposed to do next? For centuries, Christians have gone on pilgrimages to wrestle with these kinds of questions. But here's the tension. Do you actually need to travel hundreds of miles to find God, or is he already closer than you think? In this episode of Faith with Mitch, I sit down with my close friend, Ben, someone who's been part of my life for years. We went to college together, served in the military in different capacities, studied in seminary, and have walked a lot of life side by side. But at a pivotal moment in his life, Ben decided to do something radical. He walked the Camino Francés, a 500-mile pilgrimage stretching from southern France across Spain, ending at the Cathedral of St. James. And he didn't do it just for the experience. He went because he was wrestling. Questions about calling, about vocation, about marriage, singleness, and the future, about what it really means to be faithful to God. In our conversation, we talk about what he discovered along the way, about God, about himself, and about the surprising truth that you might not need a 500-mile journey to encounter God at all. Sometimes it's the small, ordinary things, the ones we overlook, that end up mattering most. But pilgrimage, whether far or near, is often a means of grace through which God gives us the eyes to see what has always been there. So whether you've thought about going on a pilgrimage or you just feel spiritually restless where you are, I think this conversation will meet you there. If this kind of honest, thoughtful conversation is helpful for you, consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow and it allows me to keep having conversations like this. All right, here's my friend Ben. And as always, welcome to Faith with Mitch. What is your favorite spiritual discipline and why?
Sure, no, it's a good question. So in this might be a strange one, but in general, my first thought would be to say fasting. I don't practice that all the time. There's ebbs and flows to that in my life, but that has been a really powerful spiritual discipline for me, and even just kind of like channeling my desire for God in this aspect of humbling myself, and yeah, it's very interesting. There's usually always something that comes out of that time, and I really do thank God for that. But fasting has also made me love feasting, and
me too.
That's great. I love that, Mitch. And yeah, feasting. I think feasting within kind of the course of how we celebrate in the church year, and certainly like the high feast of Easter, and celebrating, and as a part of all that, good family, good food, family, friends, things like that, right? And I have a friend who has said to me that Christian of all people in the world should know how to party because of Jesus' resurrection. And so I think there's something to that we should be, as Lewis said, as Christian in our feasting as we are in our fasting. So a little bit of both there, but if I had to choose just one, perhaps feasting.
It's good. I would say probably study, and that sounds maybe cliche or weird to some people, but I've always viewed my time, like throughout my time in seminary, as a form of worship and prayer, and I really enjoy that, and especially cherish it with two kids, because you don't get as much time as you've seen over the past couple days with my two sons.
Can I ask you one other icebreaker question as we're starting out here? So we're going to be talking about pilgrimage in just a little bit, and we spent some time together on the trail. One of the things we talked about then that I want to connect to that and ask you now is, what were you carrying in your pack on the Camino? Or not, sorry, we weren't on the Camino together. What were you carrying in your pack on the Via Francigena, whether literally or metaphorically?
Literally or metaphorically?
Yeah, answer any way you want.
To answer it, initially, my thought is, I remember, I think our first day of hiking, and it was our first or second day. I don't know if we were at the hotel or what, but you picked up my pack. And you were like, Oh, what do you got in there? That's heavy. So I specifically took things out of my pack that next day. But in terms of going, what do you have in your pack theologically or metaphorically? Sure. It was just this sense of needing to discern God's calling and recognizing the opportunity to join a friend on the trail.
Sure.
To kind of do that together a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
So one biblical author, one question. If you could ask one biblical author one question, what would it be and why?
Sure. I'd probably ask Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, whether he ended up getting married when he went into exile in Egypt or not. That was one of the things I was able to write a paper on in my time in seminary, and kind of looking at both the witness of singleness and also the married life. And Jeremiah himself was called by God not to marry while he was in the land of Israel, because God was bringing judgment there. And the interpretive question is, did God say, don't marry because I'm bringing judgment, or was it, don't marry and I'm bringing judgment? And so as something that I've been discerning in my own path and vocation, kind of that question, I'd just be curious to speak with Jeremiah and say, hey, what happened after you went off into exile with the rest of your people? Which is, you don't really remember that a lot, or that's not a key detail perhaps in Jeremiah, but is one that, I came across and was able to study a bit. So, yeah.
Would it change anything depending on his answer?
Possibly.
For you?
Yeah, possibly.
What way you think? Just seeing as marriage or singleness being seasonal, potentially for some people, or something different.
Potentially. I mean, I think it's interesting in the sense that there have been moments on my own process and my own path of discernment and responding to God's call in my life that I very much resonated with Jeremiah at times, and that's just one of the ways. There's some other things there, but I think getting his answer, talking with him, would provide insight on my own life and vocation, and whether or not it means I choose this path or that path. It might even just kind of bring clarity what's already in my heart. Maybe my path in the end isn't exactly the same as his with regard to marriage or singleness, however that played out for him, but maybe that just highlights that for me. And I think he would be an excellent discussion partner for anybody discerning between marriage and singleness, and even singleness in a season, which is different than singleness over a lifetime in service to Christ and the church.
I find it interesting. I don't know what gospel it is, but that I took a class in seminary as well on Jeremiah, and one of the people, one of the prophets that the disciples, or one of the disciples, proposes when Jesus asks, who do you say that I am, is the prophet Jeremiah. And that there was something about Jesus that reminded them of Jeremiah. In terms of a biblical author that I would ask, I think, as you know, I'm a big fan of Paul in terms of, in the New Testament, of characters that I just admire. And I would ask him, what was it like to confront Peter? As someone who is not an OG disciple, what was it like to confront Peter in the book of Acts?
Yeah. Which fun tidbit. I mean, the icon of Peter and Paul over your shoulder here is something that I gave to you as a small token of our friendship, because often you are the Paul and I'm the Peter, both for better or worse in those ways, and yet we need each other, right?
Those personality resonates with each of those characters. So before we dive deep into more of the logistics of your pilgrimage, for those who don't know, what is a pilgrimage, and how would you describe that in your own words?
Sure, yeah. There's probably a host of different ways to describe or define it. I would just say simply it's walking in prayer with an intention. And often it's to some significant site, a sacred site, and I think another component actually of some of these pilgrimage paths is that you're also walking in the steps of other Christians and people who have been seeking God or bringing something in intention with them in prayer. So yeah, again, there's probably a lot of ways you could define it, but simply walking in prayer with an intention. I think it's this embodied act of seeking God.
It's good. You don't have to walk the Camino to know God. What's going on there in that?
Yeah. That was something you and I discussed. So it was interesting. I walked the Camino de Santiago, the Camino Francés, which is the French way. It's an old route that goes from southwest France, cuts east to west across Spain to the Cathedral of St. James in Santiago de Compostela. And I can say more about that later perhaps, but your question is, or your comment of you don't have to walk to know God in that sense, that came up in our conversation because as I was walking this nearly 500-mile path, there was graffiti all over the place in certain buildings or rundown rural places that I might come across. And there was some really provocative graffiti, actually. I mean, there was one graffiti bit that somebody had spray painted on the side of the building was, how do you know that someone loves you? Mm-hmm. Which I thought was a fascinating question because often I think of it the other way. How do I know I love somebody? I just say that as a segue, though. There was one spray of graffiti, whatever. Somebody had sprayed this question or this, sorry, not a question, this statement on the side of a building saying you don't have to walk the Camino to know God. And it was communicating, I think, the sense of like, hey, you don't have to go through all this to know God, to know God's love for you. And perhaps maybe there's a underlying sense of you don't have to earn your salvation by going on pilgrimage. And I certainly appreciate that sentiment. And I would just say, though, that I was walking because I know God's love for me and I want to journey deeper into fellowship with God. And so, a pilgrimage is a spiritual discipline. I mean, maybe I should have said that for what my favorite spiritual discipline is, but pilgrimage is a spiritual discipline. And you certainly don't have to do it to know God, to know God's love for yourself. But for me and for a lot of other people across history, it has been a very meaningful practice of journeying deeper into God's love and bringing very practical and real human hopes and longings into a deeper place in one's relationship with God.
So take me back to the moment where you were convinced that you needed to go on a pilgrimage.
A lot of things have been kicking around for the past really kind of 8 years, responding to Jesus' call in my life in a particular way. And it was in the fall of 2024, so like a year and a half ago, I was thinking about some of these things again when I got a sign from God. I was driving, I happened to be driving by a church building as I was thinking about these things and praying about them when there was a signboard from the church, or just like the church sign saying what church it was, right? And at the bottom of the it's not a billboard, signboard, whatever, there is this phrase, Salvator ambulando. I took one semester of Latin in college, not enough to translate that on the spot. So I said, that's interesting. There's just some sort of draw. What is Salvator ambulando? And so I did a quick, as we do, a quick little Google search. And it translates into English as it is solved by walking. In some of my research I've come across, the phrase is attributed to St. Augustine. It's kind of this idea of that there's something, by moving forward, by trying things out in faith, things are solved as you take steps in faith to respond to God's call in one's life. So anyhow, I saw that sign though, and I said, it is solved by walking. And I said, okay, I got to go on a walk. These things will be solved as I go on a walk.
That's classic, I feel like, for you to just have like this.
For better or worse. That's why I'm like Peter and you're like Paul.
And looking to Is this something that is a more regular occurrence? I can imagine myself watching this video with a little bit of a critical eye and being like, oh, that sounds like the type of person who just opens their Bible and picks Jeremiah 29:11 and says, that's me. Sure. That's for me. What would you say to that?
Yeah, what would I say to that? I mean, I think often, I say somewhat jokingly, I saw a sign. I mean, I say that because it was literally a sign board, right? But when I saw that, I didn't feel like, I have to do this or else. Like, it wasn't anything like that. There was a resonance I felt in my spirit as I saw that, and I believe the Holy Spirit's part of all of that, so there's a connection there for me. I mean, this is a whole different subject, right, Mitch? But as I've reflected on this, and this goes into discernment, decision making, but I think sometimes when we're looking so much externally for signs, we're going to find what's already inside of us. It's going to be reflecting what's in our spirit. So, like, if you open the Bible and find a specific verse, right, and say, "Oh, this is God's word for me," like, yeah, maybe because the Holy Spirit's in you and there's some sort of connection, right? What I've loved about pilgrimage, there's been real growth for me in this area too, but around discernment, and maybe we really should do another episode on that, because I think there can be some unhelpful ways that I learned to think about that and discerning God's will, God's lead in my life, and then I've learned some more helpful ways perhaps. But if you just open your Bible at a random point and say, hey, this is God's will for me, hopefully it's an easier verse to grasp and apply in that way, but like, great, and meditate on that, pray about it, talk with friends, and there might be hidden treasures in that. But I do think the beauty of God's call in our life ultimately is life-giving. It does invite us right into challenging places, even to die to ourselves at points. But ultimately, it is about life that Jesus says, "I've come to give them, us, life abundant," right? Eternal life that begins in this world and continues on to the next. So, again, don't know if I answer your question. Some general thoughts I have about that. Great question.
No, it's good. So I know for my own story of you, you saying, hey, I might be going on a pilgrimage, and then you're like, I'm going on a pilgrimage. And I'm like, okay, let me know before you solidify the dates. And then next I call you up, and you're like, no, I'm going on this date, which again, as I've highlighted to you, caused some stress in my own life and household. But I wanted to go because I also was wrestling with a few things about vocation and Christian apologetics and what step to take in that regard, that I thought walking with a friend for a little bit would help me wrestle with. But for you, what were some of those things that you were wrestling with that ultimately compelled you to go on the great walk?
Sure. Before I answer that, I'm sorry, Mitch. That's where, as a friend, you showed me some grace. You did say, hey, before you book, things, let me know. And there was some extenuating circumstances on my end, perhaps, but I went ahead and did it. And you had the opportunity to join me and showed me some grace there. So I appreciate that. What were the things that I was wrestling through? Largely this question of vocation, like how do I live out what Jesus is calling me into? And I think there's some really basic things that Jesus calls all of us into. Within that, kind of thinking about this question of ordained ministry, what does that look like for me? And that's something I had heard that call years before, had responded to, but was still sort of wrestling through in terms of how do I live that out. So that was kind of one thing. And then in conjunction with that, for me, this very practical but also meaningful question of marriage or celibacy and singleness. Do I take vows one way or the other? And then also kind of working through my desire in that and understanding what I've heard Jesus' call in that space. And so I think those things were some of the key ones. And then probably the third component in that, which is related, is just I've been in this season of discernment, transition, in some ways pilgrimage already before I took a step on the Great Walk or the Camino later, but just trying to make sense of everything that's taken place in my life in the past 5+ years. Mark a time on the pilgrimage where I could have literal space and time to be with God, to share some of that with you as a friend and other people I met on the way, right? But just to have time in the present, to be with God, and then to look forward a little bit, knowing I'm going to be making some concrete decisions coming out of this. So yeah, two very specific things, and maybe that third thing was just this whole kind of milieu or just big collection of things that I wanted to process in prayer and walking and talking.
That's good. So we have this booklet that we both got a copy of when we went to Canterbury Cathedral for the Via Francigena.
That was cool.
Tell me a little bit about the significance of this and for your own walk on the Camino.
Sure, yeah. So this is a pilgrim passport, and so this one's for the Via Francigena. The one I also got for the Camino is very similar, and you use it to stamp the different locations that you have been to along the way, and it's kind of twofold, I think. One, it proves that you actually walked the trail and you didn't just show up a mile out, which there's a place to do that. There's a lot of different ways to pilgrimage, but in terms of like some of the official way to mark that, it stamps where you've been. And then also one of the great things, like, as I open this, Mitch, and look at it, it has the stamp from Canterbury Cathedral, and that brings back to me specific memory of that place, or some of these other stamps, like when we got to Dover on the coast, a stamp from there. And so it's also something great in terms of just the memories that you have from that time. Which one memory I just want to throw out there real quick. We didn't plan this one, but I did love. I think it was the first day on the trail. You and I were walking, and it started raining. Like, it was pouring buckets as we started walking, right? And so we waited it out just a little bit in a grocery store, and then kept going. But as we were walking, there was, I think it was like a slug on a sidewalk, or a snail or something like that, and you took time to shepherd it into
I don't remember that.
I might have even taken a photo, but you shepherded it onto the grass. That's
embarrassing.
No, I think that's great. That was love for all of God's creatures.
That's what I tell my son. Be nice to God's creatures.
And it was very Franciscan of you in the best way. And
hilarious.
Loving all of God's creation. So yeah, it just, like, again, like the stamp, looking at that stamp kind of registered that memory as I was thinking about our path, right? So,
was I a little bored?
No, I think you were just overflowing with God's love in that moment.
That's hilarious. So briefly revisit our time in England. Maybe a favorite moment.
Sure.
Or impactful moment of that time.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think, as I reflect on that, it was just great to be out there with you, because after we parted eventually, I was journeying by myself for a bit, and looking back, it just made me appreciate life is better to journey with a friend, and we had a lot of laughs and good times and meaningful conversations too. Like I think too, what was interesting after you and I had, again, we didn't spend a whole lot of time walking together, but we spent 2 solid days and some other adventures, and I think that facilitated, when we ended up getting to France and had some time down there, facilitated some like really meaningful conversation, heart to heart, things between you and me that probably wouldn't have happened if we hadn't, walked and sweated and bled and other things on our 2 days on the trail. I do remember one specific memory. Well, 2 I'll share real quick. One is we happened to be passing. The trail went right through the garden of a old church I forget how old it was, but it was old. And it was and the church was no longer used for worship because it had just, whatever, the congregation that had dwindled, the population had shifted, but it was still maintained. And there was something about going into that space that had been used for worship and still recognized as a church, and just being there with you. And I don't know, there was something sacred in that moment. And then there was another moment where I remember we stopped for lunch. Maybe it must have been the first day we stopped for lunch. We kind of just found a little clearing and just like sat on the grass and ate whatever food we had. It was just really simple, but like a memorable time. And how often do you go sit out in a field with your friend right after you've walked how many miles and share a simple meal? So among others, those were probably two of my favorite from that time.
It's good.
Yeah.
There are a number to choose from. I think going to C.S. Lewis's gravesite was particularly meaningful. Just the processing of this person that I've read about. I've read his writings, things that he's proclaimed in his life, things about Christianity, writings about his own story, struggle with processing the death of his wife, those things, and just being near but also not near to the person at the same time. Sure. And recognizing like this beautiful life came to an end. And even on his tombstone is, I think it's, all men must go hence. And it's like you're kind of just really confronted with that,
sure,
with his life and legacy, and the fact that he's proclaiming that even after he's gone. And then to lighten the mood a little bit, you saw a guy with a band shirt on, and you're like, oh, I got to talk to that guy. Because you had some a friend who liked the band or something.
Correct, yeah.
And that you almost like went in for a hug. And I couldn't.
With a complete stranger.
I couldn't
very
keep
American of me.
And not just a complete stranger, but a guy from Great Britain, an Englishman.
Sure. He was a friend I just hadn't made yet.
Who, not particularly known for being all that friendly.
Yeah, I did. That was you got to rise out of that. I did. You were behind us. You saw me lift my hand to hug him, and then you saw me lower my hand. It's like, maybe
better not. Okay, so let's dive into the Camino. Tell me a little bit about that trail. That took out the majority of your time, as I understand it, 5 or 6 weeks.
Sure.
Starts in southern France. We went to Normandy. I think this is something I didn't highlight in my previous video, which was also particularly meaningful given our military backgrounds. But when I left, and what happened from there, and just the basic overview of the Camino.
Yeah. Well, I had to make it to Saint Jean Pied de Port, which is in the southwest part of France, which is where it's one of the start points to the Camino Francés, the French way. And so I just about over the course of a week made my way south through France. Went to 2 different towns along the way. Had a wonderful time in France. It was great. A lot of good food, and just overall really good time. I don't know if I told you this before. This was auspicious in one way or another, but I had gone down to Bordeaux for a couple days to kind of do a refit and reorganization and get some last supplies. And the day that I set out from Bordeaux, which was I was starting pilgrimage again because I went to this pilgrimage site in France before going to connect with the Camino. And as I was leaving Bordeaux, there was a big windstorm that shut down some train lines for a couple hours and caused some detours. And I found out after the fact, when I was on the Camino, that the name of that windstorm, they named it for some reason, was Benjamin. So auspicious one way or the other. But in general, made my way down through France, and then a significant departure point for the Camino is, again, Saint Jean Pied de Port. You probably pronounce it a little different in French. I studied Spanish, not French, forgive me. So I went down there and started the roughly 500-mile journey west to Santiago de Compostela in northwest Spain, yeah, it was a great time. And I'll just say too, as a brief overview of the Camino. So pilgrims have been walking to the Cathedral of St. James, or according to tradition, where the Apostle James is buried in Spain. They've been walking there since around the 9th century. So that's give or take roughly 1,200 years that pilgrims have been journeying to this place. And the route that I took is one of the older, if not the oldest route, perhaps, heading to the cathedral. And so I.
So are there multiple
yeah.
routes that are technically part of the Camino that you could take?
Sure. Yeah, exactly. So again, in Spanish, Camino, the way, the road, it is. Yeah, it's funny. I met people out in California. I told them I was going on the Camino. Like, that's a car. What are you talking about? But so multiple different paths. Again, the most popular one is the one I took, the Camino Francés. You have the English way that comes down from the north coast of Spain. You have the Portuguese way that goes through Portugal to Santiago. You even have a route that starts in the southern part of Spain and goes up across the interior of the country. And there's the North Way, which is very mountainous. And so, yeah, multiple different routes to get to the Cathedral of St. James.
So it's 500 miles.
500 miles, yeah.
Take me through some of the logistics of walking 500 miles.
Interesting. Yeah, sure.
How you made that work?
Sure. Probably logistic item number one, pack a very light backpack.
That's what you told me.
And again, I've been used to carrying a little bit more weight in my pack, but as I was talking with a friend who did the mountainous Northway, he said, "Hey, keep it 17 pounds or under," and that's pretty light. So pack light, and I even, after a week or so on the Camino, I even took out things that I didn't really need, and I saved like another 4 pounds, and I mailed it to a friend I had just met who was living in Madrid, and I picked it up later because I said, I still got to walk like 400 miles, so 4 pounds over 400 miles adds up. But yeah, so just kind of planning through my gear list. What else? I mean, I generally knew the route that I was going. I'm a planner. Generally, I like to plan things. This was a time in my life where I was kind of just casting things to the wind. I'm like, hey, I'm going to walk this way,
I understand it. Part of that was driven by some health struggles and things you encountered on the trail.
Yeah, I had some lower body injuries I was working through this previous year, and so I just got to a point where I said, okay, I'm feeling a little better. We'll see how my hip holds up. I'm just going to go do it, and if I have to stop, then I'll stop, right? And thankfully, actually, those, like, my foot and my hip started to feel better on the Camino. I think simply because, like, it was under some load and it was strengthening over time. And so yeah, my planning was loose.
Did you ever think you wouldn't make it?
No, but I was never assured that I would make it, and so it was just kind of journeying each day. Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of went into this with somewhat little expectation. I just kind of, and I think it helped in the spirit of pilgrimage, just poco y poco, step by step, little by little, and not think about the 500 miles, but just each day, and that kind of worked out for me. And I'll say one other thing on the logistics too. Some people will book reservations ahead of time at the pilgrim hostels along the Camino. They're called albergues, and that's totally great. I think there's many different ways to pilgrimage. For me, I wanted to just wake up each day and see what was ahead of me. I did make perhaps a couple reservations, but mostly I'd wake up in the morning, I'd have something to eat. Most of the time I did end up walking with other people I met. We'd walk, we'd stop somewhere for lunch, and then where we got to in the evening, we would find another albergue.
What was it like to be reliant on other people
to some degree throughout the trip. So as I understand it,
Sure.
hospitality of others came into play.
Sure.
And anything you
Yeah.
learned from that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, so two things. One, I think about some friends of mine who you really see how hospitality is integrated into part of their life of faith and witness. And so that's just something that I've appreciated experiencing. And thank you always for your hospitality as well. So that's, I think of that witness. When I was on the Camino, I met, maybe I'll talk about her more later, but I met this older German-French woman, and I told her I was journeying to the Cathedral of St. James because I wanted to be close to Jesus. In some sense, there's like this transitive property in the terms of pilgrimage of, all right, if I'm close to James, who lived his daily life and broke bread with Jesus and walked around with Jesus himself, there's this feeling of being close to Jesus, right? And I told her this, and she said, no, you're not walking to Jesus. Like, he's here now. You're walking deeper into him. And after I had that conversation with her, my prayer, because I would say a prayer at the beginning of each day, that kind of just name an intention, pray, bring things before God. And my prayer after that conversation with her changed to, Jesus, I surrender myself to you and to the road. Like, I surrender into you today. Lead me where you will. And what's cool is the first day that I prayed that prayer, I overshot my intended destination. I was feeling pretty strong that day, so I said, hey, it's still daylight for a couple more hours. I can keep going. There's another albergue that's supposed to be open in this town. Well, I get to that town a couple hours later as the sun's going down, and nothing's open.
I kind of remember, I feel like you messaged me.
I probably did. And so I was debating between, do I sleep in the woods over there, or do I walk another, 2-4 kilometers to the next village? And I was pretty smoked at that time. I'd walked pretty far. And what was really cool about all this is there just happened to be in this like semi-deserted Spanish town, this young couple that was walking their dog. And we started talking, and I was asking them about the albergues or the hostels, and they offered me help. And there was a little bit of a language gap there, so I didn't really understand what they were offering me. And I said, okay, I'll take your assistance. Thank you so much. And so they took me, so the young man and his girlfriend, they took me to his parents' house. They just bought a home in the Spanish countryside. They took me there, and they said, you can stay here for tonight. And they literally had a brand new mattress no one had ever slept on before. They ripped the plastic off. They gave me slippers in the house, like they put shoes on my feet. And then his mother, Marie, who's a chef by training, made me a wonderful meal. Literally the best tomatoes I've ever had in my life. And then because I'm a pilgrim, after she, gave me the main meal here, she cooked up a giant cheeseburger and then slapped that on my plate.
That's awesome.
And so the reason I say this about hospitality is because it was that morning that I prayed, Jesus, I surrender into you. Lead me where you will. And just the circumstances of when I met that couple in this semi-deserted town, and then it was really beautiful, and I still stay in touch with them. I need to send them a message, by the way, and they were very faithful people, and again, there was no sense, and I would have been happy to pay them for their hospitality, but I had the sense that would denigrate their gift of hospitality if I tried to pay, and they acted out of this real, I think, faith, hope, and love for God, and I was thankful to be a recipient of that. So that was one key thing, and there's other things I could say about the people that I walked with on the Camino and how they made space for me, or I made space for them, and some of that mutual journeying together. So
are there any other highlights from the trip that you want to share before we get into what it was like to arrive?
I think it was a very prayerful time. It was, and again, I could give you a lot of highlights. I'll keep them short. I'll select just a few. But there were some friends I made literally along the way that were going through this moment of conversion, of coming to faith, of belief in God and love for God. And it was really encouraging me to be able to walk alongside them. And So one of my friends who was going through this experience of conversion and faith and coming to Christ, he and I went into this small church to pray one day. And it was just one of those moments where you feel God's presence. There was just this peace and joy that we both mutually felt. And it was very moving. And so to share that moment with him, and I can think of, some other moments like that. I think for me, it's funny, on the Camino, I was hoping to narrow the aperture of some of the things I was discerning through and praying through and bringing to God, right? And that did really happen in some ways. I did get some answers. The aperture did narrow. But in other things, the aperture just like blew up, which was interesting. But one of those things that I received as a grace in my time on the Camino, and I had kind of been swinging back and forth between two particular things. Like one of the days I was praying and I was agitated in my spirit and I was kind of restless. And so the next day it's like, okay, I'll surrender this to you, Jesus. I surrender this to you. And there was a lot of peace that came with that. But there was also sadness and some mourning for perhaps what I might be losing in that surrender. And all, I think, in a healthy and kind of good way. And then there's the third day that I had this epiphany in my soul, and I just said, it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter. And there was just so much joy and freedom when I said that. Like it doesn't matter.
In terms of what, the direction you take, or
that,
what?
But even like so the reason I say this is because, and it took me a while to understand what was like birthed in my heart in that moment, or that grace that I received from God. But when I say it doesn't matter, it wasn't a nihilistic, oh, nothing matters, right, we're all going to die. Because the fruit that I was experiencing from that was love and joy and peace and patience and so forth, right? And what I came to realize after the Camino, I didn't understand this on the Camino when that happened. What I realized after the Camino is that experience of feeling in my heart and my soul that it doesn't matter was a posture of surrender and indifference before God. Not that I
like
don't,
a healthy,
not that I don't care, but my chief concern is God, and I'm indifferent. And this is a grace, but as long as I can love God and love others, as long as I can be at the feet of Jesus, it doesn't matter if God calls me into health or sickness, poverty or wealth, marriage or singleness, success or failure, this or that. And certainly, like, I'm human, there's still desires and hopes, and like, there's still very real things there, but there was just a deepening experience of trust and surrender to God and all that. And again, reprioritizing, Jesus, I really want to love you and follow you. And so that was a real epiphany and revelation.
Do you think the Camino had something to do with that?
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, for probably a multitude of reasons. One, simply walking for like 30 to 40 days, right? There's a lot of things that percolate in your soul and your mind and come up in conversation. And so I think that was a simple part of it. I think, too, and part of the reason I went to walk on the Camino, and you and I walked on the Via Francigena for a little bit, is because I wanted to walk where other people of faith, other Christians, had carried their intentions in prayer. And there was a sense of that on the Camino. There was some residue of those prayers of other pilgrims, and so I think, I think that was a grace of walking on the Camino over time, and what God was doing in my heart in things loosening up that perhaps I'm holding on tightly, that I don't even realize maybe, but deep down in my heart, God sees, right? Yeah.
That's good. I think we're going to stop here, and when we dive back in, we'll explore what it was like to finally arrive at your destination on the Camino, and maybe share a bit more about some of the things that you might have realized, or just the impressions you have, or what you walked away with in coming back to the States in your life now. So thanks for your time and for sharing your story, and we look forward to part 2.
Thanks, Mitch.
So we talked about some of the highlights on your walk on the Camino, and the, at times, difficulty that it was, the relying on others in your pilgrimage, some of the highlights and some of the people that you'd met and some of the things that you had been wrestling with. What was it like over the course of 5-6 weeks or so to finally arrive?
Yeah, I will answer that question. I do want to highlight, again, there was this older German-French woman I met, and she helped shape my paradigm and kind of framework in which I was engaging and walking on the trail. And one of the things that she said was, hey, the Camino is like Jesus. Like Jesus, there's unconditional love here, there's healing, but there's also challenge. And if our hearts are closed and not open to what God might offer us on the Camino, then it's not going to hit us. It's not going to get to us.
So what was it like to finally arrive?
Yeah, what was it like to finally arrive? It was probably in equal parts very exciting and underwhelming. Everyone has their own experience on the Camino. I think for me, I got really excited when I saw or got to the last 100-kilometer marker. It's this sense of it's just around the corner. It's another couple days at that point. And then again, a friend and I were walking together at this point, and there is a hill from outside of the city of Santiago from which you can see the spires of the cathedral. And again, there's this sense of, wow, it's there, we're here. And then kind of the immediate moment of walking into the courtyard of the Cathedral of St. James, that itself was a little underwhelming, perhaps because I had already been experiencing those emotions, that sense of anticipation. But then shortly after I got there, there was this sense of, I was just kind of moved by what I encountered in that space, and some of just the collective sense of accomplishment with some of the other pilgrims I've been walking with. So it was very interesting. There was, I don't know, these ebbs and flows of what that felt like. But it was altogether, it was very, very meaningful, yeah.
Did it solve all your problems?
It solved the core one. And again, I had shared how I was hoping to narrow the aperture on things I'm discerning and get answers. And in some ways that did happen. In other ways it blew kind of the doors wide open. I think for me it really recalibrated again how I'm praying. What is my chief vocation in life? And before I do this or do that or whatever, like really my chief vocation is to love God with all my heart, mind, and soul, full stop. And within that is to love my neighbor as myself, to love stranger, family, friend, and foe as myself. And I think that's been incredibly clarifying, because I tend to get stuck at 30,000 feet as I'm discerning, which there's a moment, there's a time for that, right? But I get stuck up there. But it's really in the granularity of daily life that one's vocation is lived out. And so it really helped reframe how I'm discerning, how I'm praying. And I think too, there's this sense of I received what I needed in that time from God. And so in that sense, there was a real change. And there really is. I think fundamentally there are graces I received from my time on the Camino that have changed me. So in that way, very much so. The story's still unfolding, but in some real way, I found the answers, got the answers I needed. Which is also cool, because it didn't come in the exact way or time that maybe I had expected it. And there's a woman I met, again, this older German-French woman who helped shape my understanding of the Camino. She had shared her story with me about walking the Camino 30 years ago, and she got to the end of the Camino for what she was searching for, and she was just searching to find out who God was. And she got to the end of the Camino, and she said she wept because she didn't get the answer. And then it was a couple weeks later that it all came together for her, and she had an encounter with God and kind of knew who God in Christ Jesus is, and through the Spirit. And that was helpful too, because I think it wasn't all figured out right when I got to Santiago, but in literally some of the days and weeks after, things started to connect and those answers come into full view. Yeah.
So are there any other
Yeah.
takeaways you have from your time on the Camino that you'd want to share? And then what
Sure.
would you tell somebody who wants to go or is feeling called to go on a pilgrimage, and also those who want to go but can't?
Sure. Yeah. Again, there's other takeaways that I have. I'll share just maybe two of them right now. One is it's the smallest things that matter most. In discerning different things, making decisions, I'm so focused on getting to the right decision or hearing God correctly and responding correctly, and that matters, right? But what I realize is actually how you go about that process itself and how you go about making those decisions, living them out, matter just as much, maybe if not more. Your son could have told me that. I mean, go to Sunday school and you know, I could ask the children there and they could say, yeah, it's, you know, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. It's the smallest things that matter most. And that's the beauty, I think, of following Jesus, is that that's not rocket science. You don't have to go to seminary. You don't have to have an advanced degree. You don't need to be have all this intellectual knowledge. It's part of it, but not the end-all be-all, right? There's places for all that. And yeah, it's the beauty of following Jesus, though, is that that conversion had to take place in my heart, that growing in my relationship with Christ, right? And yeah, so that's one thing. And I think another thing is just, yeah, God's graciousness and the depth and power of God's goodness for us through Christ. Yeah, again, there's more I could say on that. Just the people I met on the trail or people I encountered at the end, but there was a real deepening of maybe my capacity to experience God's love and hopefully be a vessel for that. So those are some of the takeaways that are still like percolating and kicking around in my daily life. Your other question about what would I say to people who are interested in pilgrimage, and then what might I say to people who, for whatever reason, maybe can't go on a pilgrimage like you and I did, or an even longer one like I ended up doing. I would say for the people who are interested, do it. I think it'd be great. And what I would say to the second question, well, what if people can't go on a pilgrimage in this way? I would say there's many ways to pilgrimage, and that connects to both groups. So maybe you're interested, but you don't have the time. There might be other constraining factors. Maybe you go for a week on the Camino. Maybe you walk around your neighborhood every morning for a week. Like, that is an act of pilgrimage right there. What's interesting on the Camino de Santiago, and I'm sure this is true in other places as well, but you can receive, if you will, official credit for walking the pilgrimage if you do the at least the last 100 kilometers, 60 miles. And it was funny when I got to that point, because you start seeing people you've never seen before, and their clothes are a little cleaner, they look a little more chipper, and you're like, who is this person? You're like, oh, okay, yeah, they're just starting here, and there's this sentiment that I encountered that, oh, they're not doing it the right way. They should do the full thing, but I never felt that way. I rejoiced to see new people on the trail, and I really do think there's a lot of ways to pilgrimage. And it was even one of the really moving things at the end. Maybe this is one of the last takeaways I'll share with, because it ties some of this together. But one of the really moving things I encountered was at the Cathedral of St. James, meeting people I had never seen before in the month month plus I'd been on the Camino, but they were also pilgrims, and I was like, where did you come from? And then I realized, there's different routes leading to the Cathedral of St. James, so they had also been on pilgrimage and in prayer, and it just, again, really struck me again, there's a lot of ways to pilgrimage as we follow Jesus, and again, somebody's faith journey might look different than mine, but Jesus can still very much be there calling them. There's things I think about in Jesus' own parables, or as he talked about his sheep from another fold. How God's doing stuff that we don't always see and understand. And I was just really moved by that, and that's a takeaway I carry with me. Go pilgrimage. It's great. There's so many different ways to do it.
It's great. I think some of what you have shared reminds me of my time in Israel, where I would go to these places of like historical, biblical, spiritual significance, whether it be the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or other places like that. And I didn't have this necessarily spiritual encounter, and I found that the more impactful places like the Sea of Galilee or in the wilderness had a greater impact on me. Sure. But I was also left with the impression that you don't have to go to these places, like you had said, to encounter God. That you can do that in your own backyard and in your daily life, and that there's a spiritual element to just daily living, and like speaking to that faithfulness that you talked about of maybe I don't have all the strategic high level things figured out, but I know that I'm just called to be faithful. Yeah, I think that is a good message. So thanks for sharing your story, for being on Faith with Mitch. And hopefully there's more to come.
I hope so. Yeah, thanks for having me, Mitch, and it was good journeying with you, my friend, and I hope we do it again.
That's good. Same.
That's it for this episode of Faith with Mitch. If you made it this far, maybe the takeaway is this. For some of you, God may be calling you to go on a pilgrimage. But for others, maybe the question isn't whether you should go, but whether you're paying attention to where God is already at work in your life. And if you want to explore that more, I'd encourage you to watch my video, What My Pilgrimage Journey Taught Me About God, Discipleship, and My Calling. Perhaps it'll really help you in your journey with God. And if these kinds of conversations are helpful, consider subscribing. Thanks for being here, and I'll catch you in the next episode. God bless.